Good morning and welcome to the video for Monday, June the 15th. This will be a video for our upcoming 6th graders. Today we're going to be talking about absolute value and how that relates to working with positive and negative integers, which would be whole numbers, and rational numbers, which would include fractions and decimal values. All of that will prepare us for working with things on the coordinate plane later on in that chapter, but I'm going to cover that in a separate video because there are enough different things to talk about with that that I don't want to try to throw that in here. So to start with, let's talk about comparing two negative integers. So if we use a number line, that can help us. It can also help us with finding place value, because when we're looking at place value, we're saying how far away from 0 on the number line is that particular positive or negative number. And so -7 is going to be right here, -4 is going to be right here. And so that means that -7 being further to the left is further away from 0. That also means that it's going to be a smaller number because we are further away from 0. And the farther we go away from 0 in this direction, the smaller the number gets. The larger the number gets as we move further away from 0 in a positive direction, the larger the number would get. And so -7 is to the left of -4, which means that -7 is less than -4. So I have a positive number here. So that's automatically going to be my largest number because I don't have any other positive numbers. And then I'm going to compare -3 to -7. Well, -3 is closer to 0, and -7 is further away from 0. So -7 is going to be my smallest number, -3 would fall in the middle, and +4 would be my greatest value for that. +3 is going to be my greatest value for this one. 0 is going to fall in the middle, and a value of -1 is going to be to the left of 0 and would represent my least value. For this one should be a little bit easier because, again, we're looking at these negative numbers for all of them. -3 is going to be the closest to 0, which is going to represent my greatest value. -7 would fall in the middle, and -9 would be the least value. So one of the traps that I end up seeing people fall into is you're taking a look at this particular number and saying, well, 9 is the largest number. Well, if it's a positive number, that's true. If it's a negative number, that means we're actually farther away from 0 in a negative direction, and that means we actually have a smaller number. And this problem ends up happening when we start looking at absolute value. So what absolute value says is that -9 would be 9 places away from 0, which would actually represent a larger value than, say, -3 would, because 3, the absolute value of -3, would be +3. The absolute value of -7 would be +7. And the absolute value of -9 would be +9. And so we get into a little bit of confusion talking with that. So I'm going to use this as an example, our problem number 5 here, to talk about that. So if I were to go ahead and order these from least to greatest using this, this would be my answer. If I'm going to use absolute value to go from least to greatest, then I would have 3 spots away from 0 for this one, 4 spots away from 0 for this, and 7 spots away from 0 for this. And so that means my answer, if I'm using absolute value, would be the absolute value of -3 would be my least value. And then I'd have the absolute value of 4, and then the absolute value of -7. So the other thing with fractions, so when we're working with rational numbers, one of the things that we did a lot of in 5th grade was working to make common denominators for all 3 fractions so that you could work on them and compare them. I'm going to suggest that you probably still could do that, and you probably should if it's convenient enough to do that, but there are some tricks to get around that, because we can use a number line to help us. So when we were working with comparing fractions before, We could say that negative 1/2 would be in the middle between 0 and 1. 3/4 would represent that we are closer to our negative 1 value and would fall between 1/2 and negative 1. 2/5 would be slightly less than 1/2. So if we're using a negative number, that means that this is going to be a little bit closer to 0 than negative 1/2 is. So one of the things that you could practice at home for this would be to practice this idea of absolute value. Take some positive and negative integers and think through what the absolute value of those numbers would end up being. Another thing that you could also do is create a number line and practice kind of like what I did with a few of the examples. Put different numbers on the number line so that you can kind of get this idea of how a larger value for a negative number would be farther away from 0 and give you a smaller number compared to a number that would be closer to 0. Hope you have a wonderful day and hope your summer is going well, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.